new unilateral Black Sea grain corridor from starting in last August. So our research objective is essentially, can some machine learning forecasting methods be used to provide accurate forecasts of Ukraine's agricultural exports? Or can they at least provide some kind of insights in what might come? And we've been using some data that Vitalia was able to obtain of vessel-level export data from Ukraine's ports. So we have essentially, for most vessels departing Ukrainian ports, either in the Danube or Black Sea ports, we have the date that they departed, the quantity that they were carrying, and then the commodity, what crop, and the destination. So I'll compare a bit the Black Sea grain deal versus this new unilateral Black Sea grain corridor, and then present some of the forecasting results, which is using XGBoost as the main forecasting model. So I'm going to start just going through some things that maybe folks may already know about, but provide a little bit of context. So the solidarity lanes, this was an investment by the EU to build and improve upon existing kind of transit networks over land and river, rail, and for trucks, and also basically providing tariff suspension, so to help to facilitate quote-unquote freer trade. And this has led to, I think their latest update in April of this year was 70 million tons of Ukrainian agricultural exports, and something like 60 million tons of non-agricultural exports. So this has been quite successful. And here's a look at just, a lot of agricultural products were moved through this channel. The Black Sea grain deal, which was an agreement between Ukraine, Russia, the UN, and Turkey, kind of came into place in July of 2022. And this helped to basically open up some of these Odessa and Black Sea ports and helped to ship around 33 million tons, half of which were corn and wheat, and then sunflower products. And these are the three commodities that we focus on. And so you can see that after the initial blockade, the prices, even in the run-up to the invasion of these commodities, went very high, but the solidarity lanes and the Black Sea grain deal helped to kind of moderate these. So that brings us to the point last summer when in mid-July, July 17th, Putin decides to leave the deal, and then there was a lot of uncertainty about especially wheat markets and grain markets, and are we kind of back to the beginning in terms of agricultural trade being disrupted. And that's when kind of something very interesting kind of came about, which was the development of this new Black Sea grain corridor, where Ukraine essentially said, we have these coordinates of demined, kind of a sea channel, and ships, please just come here and we'll export without Russia kind of agreeing to let this happen. And it's also quite interesting because Russia had said that we will consider any ship coming to Odessa's ports, we'll consider that it's carrying weapons or other things, and they threatened to strike these vessels. So a few things made this possible when this was not possible in the beginning of the war. So the recapture of Snake Island, if Russia was actually holding Snake Island, then it would be very difficult to kind of have this route happen. So that was one thing. And then kind of an interesting technological development of these sea drones, which enabled Ukraine to essentially block any blockade and sunk a fair number of the Russian ships and kind of push them further east in the Black Sea. And so that kind of gave room for ships, cargo ships to come along this route. And this is just maybe a theory, but there could be something there, which is that in early August, Ukraine launched some strikes with these drones on Novorossiysk, as well as one oil tanker that maybe can be seen as kind of like a shot across the bow that you can target our shipping, but if you do that, then we can also target yours. And that led to something that maybe theoretically, maybe is more stable and more forecastable. And so that's why kind of when I was originally meeting with Vitalia and we were discussing what we wanted to work on, this seemed like an interesting kind of case study, because beforehand, the Black Sea grain deal could be kind of pulled out of at any time. It could be slowed down based on the time it took to inspect the cargoes and assemble, whereas this new Black Sea grain corridor seems a bit more stable in a way, hopefully, so far. And we also because of the data availability that we had, but the sea transport at the time, in these months when we started to work on it, was of growing importance. Also because the solidarity lanes started at that time to also seem, there could be disruption here, that some of the bordering countries to Ukraine weren't so happy about increased land transport of Ukrainian agricultural products. And so that seemed to kind of highlight the importance of these maritime export route. So this is looking at essentially the amount of maritime exports for these three top products. So for wheat, I believe we just look at wheat, but there's also wheat bran, corn, it's mainly just corn. And then for sunflower products, we aggregate that into a single measure, including sunflower seeds, sunflower oil, and sunflower mash, or what's left over after you press it. And now I'm going to kind of compare and discuss a little bit about how these two compare. So the blue dots here, or I'll start with the red dots, are the Black Sea grain deal. So that's August 2022 to July 2023. And each of these dots represents a single vessel. And if we look at the y-axis, this is the quantity and tonnage of commodity carried by the vessel. So you can see that the blue, at this point, has been kind of successfully attracting ships of about the same size as during the Black Sea grain deal. And this is kind of a similar chart, and this is looking at what was the cargo for these 5 types of cargo. So the blue, especially some of the larger vessels, is corn. The orange is wheat. So you can see in the very beginning of the Black Sea grain deal, the cargoes were predominantly wheat and smaller. Green is sunflower seed oil. Red is barley, and purple is soybean. And this also highlights something else that we found quite interesting in the data, which is that the embargo never fully stopped Ukraine's maritime exports. There was always a small amount of export taking place of smaller vessels through the Danube ports. So we can see in the period when the deal ended in July 2023, that basically did have the effect of basically freezing out larger vessels from coming to Ukraine's ports. But there was still quite a bit of traffic of smaller ships that, maybe they're getting in that Danube River and just crossing to Romania, or trying to cross out into Romanian territorial waters. But this shows some of the success of the Black Sea grain corridor in basically supporting some of these larger export vessels as well. And another important thing to mention that I think I've read is that the insurance costs have also come down since the beginning of the war, and that means that the transportation costs overall have reduced. This is another look just at the monthly export in millions of metric tons for each corridor, with the red line representing the Black Sea grain deal exports starting in August 2022 and running till the end in July 2023, and the blue line representing the Ukrainian maritime ag exports starting in August 2023 and ending in July of this year. So we can see that for some months, the Black Sea grain deal was outperforming, while for others, the Black Sea grain corridor, basically it was outperforming the Black Sea grain deal. So I think it's been a great success. The latest data we have as of August 19th, so running from the day after the Black Sea grain deal ended to August 19th of this year, we have something like 50 million tons of ag products exported through the Black Sea grain corridor in almost 6,000 vessels. So I think that's been a great success. So now we come to the methodology and what we are trying to do with this project, which is essentially how do we look forward and try to think about what might be coming. So as I mentioned, we have this row data for each marine vessel, and for the most part, it specifies the exact crop. For others, a few of the observations, it just says grains. So there's a little bit that had to be done there, and aggregating, for example, the sunflower products together. And then we took basically the daily export data from this vessel data and used that to basically create our forecast models using that data. And we wanted to, I think one of our main focuses was on wheat. So we created back in July, or the beginning of July, a 12-month forecast for the wheat marketing year, which runs from July 1st to June 30th, 2025. We had a hybrid forecasting approach using ARIMA for model inputs aggregation and machine learning model XGBoost for the model estimation. So this is just briefly looking at the steps we did, looking at the data preparation, the data transformation, developing the models, and the models testing. So for this first set, essentially, we took out the last 30 days in our data set, and then we tried to build different models to forecast those 30 days for which we had real data. And then we could actually compare how accurate the models were for each day. And this is just an example from one of the previous models. Then we went back, retrained the models on all of the available data, including that 30 days that we had left out, and then forecast for this 12-month period. So this is just a little, and part of our kind of original approach here, it's still in the early phases that we want to develop the models more, is can we provide more information or more kind of predictive power than, say, USDA ERS? So this is just starting out looking at the wheat production for the upcoming marketing year. There's a pretty wide spread. I think the new post from USDA FAS is something like 22 point something. And that the amount produced obviously has some impact on the exports. That's something we want to do in the future, is essentially use the production, the beginning stocks, and the domestic demand and use to kind of calibrate the model. So here, and we were using the USDA measures from that time, as well as Sovicon, which is a Russian market intelligence group looking at Black Sea exports. So our forecast was the most optimistic here, but I believe that we will, at this early point, before understanding how large Ukraine's harvests will be, I believe that we'll actually beat the USDA numbers, which were quite pessimistic, of 12.8 million metric tons for wheat in this upcoming marketing year. And so I think that this was kind of one thing that's quite interesting about the Black Sea grain corridor and trying to forecast it, is that when it came into being, people didn't really know what to expect in terms of the level of exports. And so following the USDA updates month to month, as the data started to come in, they became more and more optimistic. So what is kind of fun now is that we had presented this work and developed these forecasts in early July. So we can now compare what we forecast to what actually occurred. So this is cumulative export levels for this coming year. For wheat, it's lined up with the marketing year. So this gives you the estimate of 13.8 million metric tons by June 30th, 2025. Corn, the marketing year, I believe, starts in October, so it's a little bit off. And I'm actually not sure about sunflower products, which probably lines up with corn because it's a later harvest. And this also allowed us to, so the dark green, the solid green lines, this is showing basically the realized monthly export levels by sea. And then the dotted line is what we forecast. So this is for wheat until the end of the year. This is for corn, and this is for sunflower products. And so now we can compare with the data that we now have from the data for July. So we look at wheat, we forecast 1.41 million metric tons for July. The realized number was 1.28, so not horrible. Sunflower products, 224 forecast versus 254,000 metric tons realized. And then we come to corn, which is way off. And I think this third one highlights that you can't just use the machine learning kind of in absence of some of like kind of your own variables that you're putting in or thinking about. And this is because as of October 1st, or after the Ukrainian corn harvest was complete last fall, there were about 28 million metric tons available. And until July 1st, we basically have in the data about 20 million metric tons of exported maritime exports of corn. There are about 4 million metric tons of domestic usage of corn, and then that left over about 4 million. And it's possible that quite a bit of that was actually exported over land routes. And so as we're further developing these numbers, or these models, we'd like to incorporate kind of once you know what the harvest is, the beginning stocks, and you have some idea of what the domestic usage of the crop might be, that could help kind of solve some of these problems. So now I would also like to kind of talk about so who knew where Saskatchewan was before this talk? Anyone? No? So Saskatchewan's a pretty interesting place. It's kind of like the prairies of Canada. The three most agricultural provinces are Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba, but Saskatchewan has the largest amount of agricultural lands. So you can kind of see two dots on the screen here. The northern dot in Saskatchewan is Saskatoon. That's where I live and where the University of Saskatchewan is. And the lower dot is Regina. So they're about kind of similar size. So the land area is about 600,000 square kilometers. So it's about the size of Ukraine, though it has a lot of lakes and forests to the north and bears and moose and things like that, so that it has less agricultural land. 60.3 million acres of farm area, which is 40% of the Canadian total. So brown, light brown, and Chornozem soil types. It's actually interesting history. When my wife moved there, she'd never heard of it, but it turns out something like 20% of people in the province have some Ukrainian heritage from around 1900, 1910. And they actually brought some Ukrainian wheat varieties, actually brought to North America and bred into some famous US and Canadian early wheat varieties, such as Red Fife and Marquis Marquise wheat. It shares some main crops with Ukraine, such as wheat, rapeseed, which they call canola or Canadian oil, barley, and peas. And kind of one element, or kind of one lesson from Saskatchewan, potential lesson, that I think might fit into this conversation is the strong investment in public plant breeding. So they have a crop development center at the University of Saskatchewan, as well as Ag Canada, which is the Canadian federal agricultural ministry that does some plant breeding. So they have an interesting, and then briefly, here are some export numbers for Saskatchewan agri-food exports to the world. So it's not on the level of Ukraine, but you can see that they, in 2023, they exported around, almost 7 million Canadian dollars, or 7 billion Canadian dollars worth of canola products, almost 4 billion Canadian dollars worth of non-durum wheat, or spring wheat. They produce at export about 40 or 50% of the global pea trade. And so they even grow quinoa. So Saskatchewan is in kind of, a bit of a similar place to Ukraine in terms of being a major agricultural exporter. And so the federal government of Canada invests quite a bit into crop breeding and ag R&D, but they also have an interesting system of producer organizations. So like Sask Wheat, all wheat producers pay into kind of an R&D fund that helps to fund varietal development. So this study looking at wheat varietal R&D found that these investments had a benefit cost ratio of something like 32.6. Here's another study looking at the Western Grains Research Foundation, looking at their wheat and barley return on investment. So for the money that they put into developing these new types of varieties, like malt barleys, different types of wheat, they find a quite high internal rate of return. So for all wheat, around 36%, for barley, around 28%. And these are so this is saying, compare if you put into the stock market or something like that, you're getting quite a bit of return. So the Crop Development Center, which is academic, but also the faculty members do their own breeding and have developed a lot of the most successful varieties in Saskatchewan. It's a recent study done by Ernst & Young looking at the economic contributions of this ag R&D activities. So an increase in around 18 billion Canadian in gross farm output from 1991 to 2022. For lentils, an internal rate of return of around 20%, a 37 benefit cost ratio, and $4 billion worth of net benefits. And within the literature, ag R&D in general has been shown to kind of have this high return on investment. Julian Alston and Pardee, they have the ag R&D returns redux. This is kind of like not for everything, but in general, usually it's almost a surprising high return on investment. So we also, and this kind of plays into this story, we also took a look at historic Ukraine ag exports. So here we have the world export numbers, or the blue, green, and red, the darker lines below. The yellow, orangey line on top, that's the corn export from Ukraine. The purple is wheat exports, and the sunflower products are down below there. And this is looking at 2010 as a base year, which is 100%, and then how much in terms of growth was there. And so we can see that actually ag exports were growing very fast and faster than the world growth for Ukraine in the year before, decade before 2022. So we can see here as well, this red line is the all agricultural export in millions of metric tons, and then we have for corn, wheat, and sunflower products, and it shows the similar pattern of pretty large increase in these exports. And here we can see that even as this black line, which is the total exports from Ukraine in billions of USD, we see that even as that was dropping, potentially as the war began in 2014, and maybe some of the factories and industry, there was less export of iron or steel and things like that. At the same time, even in kind of the earlier conditions of conflict, we still saw this pretty explosive growth in agricultural exports from Ukraine. So this seems, the agricultural sector seems like a pretty strong, has strong potential, even though the war has basically led to some pretty strong stresses on Ukraine's ag sector of loss of ag land, mining of farmland, theft of grain, reduced profitability of Ukrainian producers, destruction of crops. So there have been some big challenges that have negatively impacted Ukraine's ag sector. But I think with this Ukraine, the unilateral Black Sea grain corridor, it shows some kind of hope and positive signs here. This is from the Ukrainian Ministry of Agrarian Policy and Food of Ukraine, that essentially in 2021, with low transport costs and the conditions at that time, Ukrainian farmers were quite profitable. However, in 2022, 2023, the average farmer was basically losing money on almost every crop except for soybean. And now in 2024, with this forecast, some of the crops are starting to look more profitable, like sunflower, soy, and winter rapeseed. And I think, you know, there is some hope there, but quite strong stress on the sector. And I believe the Ukraine may be looking at its largest soy export year this year, so there may be some kind of crop shifting going on. But I think that with this unilateral grain, Black Sea grain corridor, here is from CES, the Center for Economic Strategy, we can see that the logistics and the challenges around first the embargo and then the kind of collapse of the Black Sea grain deal, transportation was a huge issue. And that also was a huge kind of pressure on Ukrainian farmers. But now, hopefully, with this unilateral grain corridor, hopefully at least some of the logistical challenges have been solved to a certain extent. And now the ag exports could be kind of like a macroeconomic stabilizer if it's able to grow over time and kind of help in Ukraine's growth and recovery. And without knowing too much about the R&D sector in Ukraine, the Smirnivka Institute of Wheat, which is, I believe, in Kyiv Oblast in the south, is doing a lot of winter wheat variety development. And some of these kind of investments in the local breeding capacity can, you know, some of these investments have the potential on less land to increase Ukraine's agricultural productivity, but also, importantly, the profitability of farmers. So the UREF, I've done some work with the Global Crop Diversity Trust and kind of gene banks in the past. So I had known about this UREF Plant Production Institute and the main gene bank in Ukraine, which is based in Kharkiv. They also do some breeding activities, I believe, and you can, in the product catalog, they are selling pea varieties and some varieties of different crops. They have relocated the national seed collection, which is quite large, or duplicated it. And that represents kind of some strong genetic resources for future plant breeding. So I think that is kind of like an interesting area to maybe think about, is how to strengthen Ukraine's ag sector by also strengthening and rebuilding the ag R&D capacity. So with that, I will kind of conclude here. So this was very early on prototypes. And once we have more data from the Black Sea grain corridor, I think we'll be able to kind of strengthen our forecasts, and we can see how well they perform. we're currently in the process of grant writing to support future work on similar export models. I'm also collaborating with a professor in plant sciences at USask to use some machine learning forecasting and remote sensing to project winter wheat yields in Ukraine, to essentially use historic yield data from different oblasts and then, depending on the weather, try to understand how large that wheat harvest might be in advance of the harvest finishing, and also potentially to develop models to forecast wheat prices. So we're quite open to collaboration with NBU and others who might be interested. Also trying to we don't have the non-agricultural export data, but that could be interesting to include and try to look at forecasting that. And given capacity of the ports, there may be some connection there. And also incorporating agricultural exports over land routes. That's one, we don't have the data there either, but that could be something interesting to include. And finally, I just wanted to mention this MyTax internship program, which essentially is a Canadian program for Ukraine. They've doubled, with I think the Ministry of Education of Ukraine, they've doubled the amount of money available for this. So it's possible to essentially accept Ukrainian grad students, so PhD students or master's students or postdocs within a year or two of finishing the PhD, to come for 6 months for an internship to kind of work on the team, gain some experience, and then go back to Ukraine. And the amount is about 12,000 Canadian that they've allocated per intern. So if anyone knows of folks that might be interested in that, that could be something we could support. And here's, if folks have questions, here's my email and Vitalia's email, and I'm welcome to, or available to answer any questions. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Nick, for this comprehensive presentation. Just want also to mention that Vitalia and Alexa, your co-authors, are online.
Great.
I saw them here. So, guys, if you want to join the discussion, please, you're welcome. So we have plenty of time for questions and for discussion. We start with questions. Any questions? Okay, I will take an opportunity to ask the first question. Well, we already talked about this project with you, and I also already asked a couple of questions. But still, could you talk more in details what data you have? Basically, do you have daily data? So you have data on all vessels and quantities, and you can construct a daily index of basically of agricultural exports. Am I right, or is it something?
So it's. Natalia might be able to speak to this, but it's from the Uker Agro Consult. So they have from the ports, basically every vessel that's left, it seems to be the vast majority of vessels that have departed. And she was also able to obtain Russian ag export data as well, which is interesting since that may play into kind of prices. Trying to understand, because the Black Sea wheat prices, the Russian export from Novorossiysk would also impact that. Yep.
Okay, so you take this data, and what's the next step? So you construct an index, or how do you aggregate this?
Right. So it's aggregated by crop or by day, but that's the benefit, is that you have a daily measure of the exports.
Yep. And then you basically forecast this index, development of this index itself, right? Or you use this index to forecast some other variables?
This data set is used then to forecast the future levels. So it's brought into levels and then basically differenced to make it to make it stationary, and then to basically develop this here. So what would the cumulative level of export be over the forecasted period?
Okay, and you compare it with other estimates or official estimates of export of wheat and corn to Ukraine as well, right?
So we were following the USDA, WASDE forecasts, as well as the FAS Ukraine, or the Foreign Agricultural Service of the USDA. They also have like this Ukraine grain and feed quarterly. So following that.
Thank you very much. And do you take any exogenous variables for your forecasting? I mean, maybe taking into account the amount of missile attacks or weather conditions or something.
Right. And so that's the next step. We do incorporate seasonality. So week of the year and day of the week, which could, maybe on Sunday, maybe there would be less than a weekday. But that's the next step, is to try to kind of strengthen our models and bring in more variables. And I think one of the, we saw from our corn forecast, which was very off in July, at the point when the harvest is done and essentially what the total harvest is, and if you have an idea of the beginning stocks and the domestic demand, and maybe 10% will be exported over land, then that can help to basically put a max on the amount of total cumulative exports over the year, the marketing year.
Okay, thank you. We also have a question from Alexandra Betli online.
Hi, thank you very much for very interesting research. And I have a question. After grain deal was actually done, and we have now Ukrainian corridor, one of another limitations actually for grain exports, and also one more variable for your kind of focus, should be taken into account, which is exports of other goods. So when we talk about grain deal, only agricultural exports of limited basically goods was allowed to export, and currently we see also the changes. I mean, like in some months we have a lower focus of lower exports of grain, etc., just because more iron ore or steel products were exported, I mean, like abroad. So it's kind of now we have a low capacity still from exports. I mean, like when we talk about ships and then the different vessels, and then the issue is that when you do forecast of exports, whether you kind of take into account these exports of other goods, this kind of limitations. Did you account for that, or it's not yet in your model?
Yeah, it's not yet in the model. And that's a very good point, that we are looking for data on the non-ag exports, as well as, the land exports would also be of interest. I think from the 21-22 marketing year, like in the beginning of the war, the problem was not being able to transport enough of a very good harvest. But it seems now actually that like with corn, I believe that basically, I think the harvest would be in the fall, October, November. With corn, there's not much left to export. So now the challenge is less on the export kind of space or availability, and more on the production side. But of course, that depends on the year and the weather, and that could very much kind of be a constraint in the future. So it would be interesting to find non-ag export data as well, and also what types of products are being exported.
Yeah, actually, if I may continue, what we see is kind of, for example, iron ore and metallurgical products, and they were not exported by sea during grain deal, and this is clear. And another issue is that you didn't raise, but when you analyze, especially like pre-war period and after full-scale invasion study, is that seaports are very different. I mean, like Odessa ports, for example, I mean, like the specialization of ports like Mykolaiv ports, Odessa ports, etc., they were different. I mean, like from one another. and therefore it also makes an impact. And there is Irina Kasa probably. Ira, if you can comment on that, I mean, like just follow up. I mean, like because I think that this should be also taken into account when we just compare the figures between different periods. Because Irina is also on the meeting online, yeah. Probably
Yeah.
Irina will. Yeah, you
Can you
hear,
hear
yeah.
me?
Yep.
Yeah. Just a short note that yes, indeed, the ports in Ukraine are highly specialized, and the ports which are currently blocked, Mykolaiv port and Kherson port, were specialized in agricultural trade. So when the possibility of sea trade opened, the Odessa port needed time to actually be able to export grain. And now with the Ukrainian Sea Corridor, it returned to its major commodities, which are containers, steel and metal and ore.
Great, thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Do you have any questions from the audience or from online?
Maybe one. Okay. Yes. So, yes. First, I also mentioned what Alexander just said, that on some of your slides there is like Black Sea grain corridor. Grain it's like a redundant word already, so it's Black Sea corridor. We use it not
just
to yes. Also for metallurgy products, etc., etc. So, and one more question on previous two slides. You have like forecast growth production of wheat and the export of wheat. Is it separate forecast, or forecast for export is somehow connected with production? So you just exclude from production some consumption, some stocks, or it's like the separate
Right.
ones?
So I think that we did not forecast production, though that's what this kind of collaboration would be with the plant sciences, using this remote sensing data to hopefully be able to do that. But if you look at IGC, okay, IGC is not here, but if you, for example, USDA, they had a quite pessimistic original forecast for yield, production, the harvest, and that clearly is impacting their export forecast here. So we only had our export forecast. And I think the point about that it's a Black Sea corridor, I believe that it was not allowed through the grain deal to export non-ag goods. So this is the Black Sea, quote unquote, corridor, not just grain corridor. That's another benefit of this new kind of trade channel, is that it can include non-agricultural products. Great, thanks.
May I also ask a question? My name is Eugenia, and I represent Kyiv National Economic University, and I'm also affiliated with MIT Crypto Economics Lab. Thank you very much for that interesting presentation, and I have more technical questions, probably. First of all, why machine learning? What are the main benefits in comparing with our methods? And the second, how much time did it take to conduct this part of research with your colleagues? Thank you.
Thanks. So I think why the machine learning for this particular export channel seemed of interest is that essentially very few people really understood what would come, in a way, in terms of how well the corridor would perform. And so I think the machine learning approach of being able to pick up patterns, kind of new patterns that are not kind of, it's not over a long period. Maybe there are new trade relationships being generated, or kind of new patterns that are being developed. and about how long. This is still kind of like a prototype approach, and we're trying to kind of apply for more research projects to work on this. So it's kind of initial stages, basically. But I think now it's challenging to forecast this new corridor when it's existed just for over a year. But we're hoping, you know, as we get more data and it kind of hopefully settles into a more steady, it has been pretty steady at this point, then it'll become easier to forecast, essentially. Yeah. Great, thanks. Oh, how much time did it take? We kind of started and developed since March, April, but not kind of fully working on it full time, but starting to develop that, yeah.
And why Ukraine?
Why Ukraine?
What's the initial idea to conduct this research for Ukraine?
Well, it was of interest, and also Vitalia Mishenko, who's now based in Saskatoon. We were trying to develop some work together to try to kind of focus on comparative advantages of both of our interests. Yeah.
Thank you.
There are several questions in the chat in Zoom, and one of them is related to the question that you actually already mentioned during your presentation, whether your analysis incorporates only wartime or pre-war periods as well. And I think your data is only starting from 2022, right? So it doesn't incorporate pre-war period, but is it possible actually to get the data before the full-scale war?
Maybe Vitalia could say something about that. I think it could be possible. We actually, we're hoping to not, we're currently using, I believe, since August 2022, the data. But if we look here, the July of 2022 and July 2023, it's heavily influenced by kind of political events. Russia pulling out of the deal, or the beginning of the war. And so we would ideally kind of want to, you know, potentially train only on the Black Sea grain corridor. But we've obtained quite, I think, 10 years of the Russian data, and it should be possible to obtain more of the Ukrainian data. Vita, were you able to find any earlier data for the vessel level data for Ukraine's exports?
Hi, Nick. Hi, all. Yes, we have more data. Do you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah. We have more data from Ukraine. We have data from the beginning of 2000, and some data we have also from the beginning 2020 and 18 from Russia data. Yeah. So we have more data for today. Yeah.
Thank you, Vita, very much. And there's actually a very related question to also from the chat. Let me kind of read it by my own. How about exports that, well, all the stolen agricultural exports by Russians that they occupied and then exported to the world? Is it actually possible to calculate a number, or how much did they steal from us?
We don't have official data, but I've seen numbers around 3 to 6 million tons just in news articles or things like that.
But it should be somehow incorporated in the Russian data, no? Or
yeah, right. Though I think that Vita does not have export from occupied ports like Mariupol, Berdyansk, Sevastopol. So those kind of occupied ports might be where that stolen export is coming from, and we may not have that. Right, Vita? We don't have those ports.
For today, no. No. Unfortunately.
Okay, then. So thank you very much, Nick. Thank you, Vita, and thank you everyone for joining for this seminar. Nick, I wish you all the best with the project. I really see the potential, because there are so many things that you can investigate, and it's policy relevant, it's research relevant, you can do many interesting things. So I just wish you all the best, you and your co-authors, with the project. And thank you very much for joining us here today physically. It's a great pleasure. We are trying to get used to this new normal and to get back to normal lives. Although despite the missile attacks and problems with electricity. But anyway, this was indeed a very good and nice seminar. Thank you very much, and I hope to see you on our further future research events. Yeah.
And thank you so much for having us.
And actually, I'm the one who didn't know about Saskatchewan previously, so now yes, Saskatchewan, sorry. So now I need to fill it in my to-do list to visit Saskatchewan. So thank you very much, and goodbye everyone who is online.
Thank you.